In the waning dusk of the Regency era, when England stood uncertainly between the devastations of war and the fragile promise of renewal, the world seemed to hold its breath. Estates that once glowed with lanternlit splendor now bore the quiet fatigue of dwindling fortunes, and among them stood Blackthorn Hall, grand in architecture, weary in spirit. Its stone walls still boasted the pride of an old baronetcy, but the corridors echoed with the truth its inhabitants tried desperately to hide. Their legacy was crumbling, and with it, the freedom of its last remaining daughter. Evelyn Ashford had been raised to understand the rituals of duty, but she had never learned how to surrender her heart. Even as a child wandering the orchards behind the hall, listening to the murmured sorrows of the wind, she had sensed that her life would one day be bargained away. Yet her father's announcement, cold, resolute, delivered without a quiver, had carved through her chest more sharply than she expected. She was to marry the Earl of Winterfield, a man twice her age, a man whose thinning patience matched the thinning hair at his temples, a man who saw in her not a companion but a convenient solution to her family's debts. The wedding was arranged for the end of spring. Her role was to obey. But Evelyn was not made for obedience. Beneath her quiet manners lived a pulse of unyielding will, of a woman who could taste the edges of her own suffocation. She sensed it in every clinking teacup, every closed-door conversation between her father and the estate's solicitor, every measured step the servants took when passing her. The house, like her future, seemed to shrink around her. The decision to escape did not come with a burst of rebellion but with a single steady breath taken in her dimly lit bedchamber. She sat before the mirror, the candle wavering at her side, and saw not the daughter her father had molded nor the bride the Earl anticipated. She saw a woman standing at the edge of a precipice, and below her lay a life belonging to someone else entirely. She would not leap into it. She would walk away. The preparations began silently, meticulously. She packed only what she could carry: a plain gown, a wool cloak, a locket that had once belonged to her mother, and the few coins she had saved since childhood. Each item was chosen with the clarity of one who knows a bridge is burning behind her. She left a single letter on her desk, addressed not to her father but to her younger brother, the only soul in the household who had ever truly seen her. It held no apologies, only a plea for understanding. Hours before dawn, Evelyn slipped from her room, her steps feather-light across the aging floorboards. The air was thick with mist, curling through the corridors like a final warning. She descended the servants' staircase, avoiding the portraits of her ancestors whose painted eyes seemed to glimmer with quiet judgment. Outside, the world was a pale, ghostly blue, caught between night and morning. Blackthorn Hall loomed behind her, its silhouette stark against the weakened sky. She did not look back. She could not. A single backward glance, she feared, would unravel her resolve and tether her once more to a life she no longer accepted. Her mare, Rowan, waited quietly in the stable, as though sensing the unrest in her mistress's heart. Evelyn's fingers trembled as she fastened the saddle, but not from fear, rather from the pulse of freedom beating for the first time beneath her ribs. She mounted and eased Rowan into a slow, careful trot toward the eastern gate, where the path dipped into the forest and then toward the coast. Dawn's first whisper touched the horizon. Yet with each stride, a tension coiled tighter around her. The world was too hushed, too still. Even the birds remained silent, as though nature itself held its breath. Something waited at the edges of the mist, something she could not name. When she neared the wrought iron gate, the oldest structure on the estate grounds, her breath caught. A figure stood motionless in the half-light, dark against the silver fog. A horse beside him snorted softly, its breath ghosting into the air. Evelyn's heart climbed into her throat. Then the wind shifted, and recognition struck her with the force of a blow. The Duke of Harland. Gabriel Ravenscroft, quiet, inscrutable, carved from the kind of strength that bore centuries of expectation, watched her with eyes that held far more than surprise. He had returned from the Napoleonic campaigns only months earlier, a hero in the public eye, a mystery in private. She had not seen him since childhood, and yet she knew him immediately. Something in his stillness had lived in her memory all these years, like an unfinished thought. She halted Rowan several paces away. Her breath came sharp, misting in the cold. "Why are you here?" she whispered, though part of her feared she already knew. The Duke did not move. "I might ask you the same." His voice, low and steady, cut through the morning silence. Evelyn's fingers tightened around the reins. She had prepared for pursuit from her father's men, for the Earl's outrage, for the possibility of being dragged back in disgrace. She had not prepared for this, for a man she barely knew to be waiting at the very gate she had chosen for her escape. "You should not be here," she said, though the tremor in her voice betrayed the storm building beneath her composure. "No," he agreed softly. "But I could not leave you to face this alone." Her pulse faltered. He spoke as though her intentions were not a mystery, as though he had expected her at this hour, on this very path. As though he had known her heart more clearly than she did herself. A gust of wind rustled the branches overhead. The sky brightened, revealing more of the Duke's expression. Controlled, yes, but shadowed by something deeper, something dangerous. Evelyn swallowed. Between them, the world seemed suspended, the path forward unclear, the past suddenly too heavy. And as the sun breached the horizon, she realized with a shiver that her escape was no longer a solitary journey. It had already become a reckoning. The morning light grew stronger, unfurling across the mist like a silent revelation. Evelyn sat frozen atop Rowan, her breath caught between disbelief and apprehension as she faced the Duke of Harland. Gabriel did not shift in the saddle, yet his stillness carried the weight of purpose, calculated, unwavering, and entirely focused on her. The intimacy of being observed so closely unsettled her more than the threat of pursuit ever had. "You knew," she said at last, her words barely audible. "I suspected," he replied. And a suspicion was enough. The simplicity of his response unsettled her further. Men of his station did not wait in the cold dawn for a baronet's daughter. They did not concern themselves with the private turmoil of women who had no political value to them. But Gabriel Ravenscroft had always been unlike the others. Even as a boy, he had seemed hewn from some sterner morality, moving through the world as though honor were a living thing he must continually defend. "Your father sent for me last night," he continued. "He believed you might attempt something rash." Evelyn bristled. "He means I might attempt to live." Gabriel's gaze softened, but only for a heartbeat. "He fears scandal. And loss. And you? What do you fear?" He hesitated, and the pause was telling. "That you are walking into danger without understanding the cost." "I understand it better than anyone." Her grip tightened around the reins. "It is remaining that would destroy me." The wind curled between them, tugging at the hem of her cloak. Gabriel's expression darkened, though she sensed the conflict within him rather than any judgment. He guided his horse a little closer, the snow-dark stallion moving with quiet obedience. "Evelyn," he said, her name sounding unfamiliar on his lips, more intimate, more fragile. "If you ride into the world alone, you will have every curious eye upon you by midday. They will not forget a lady who fled her engagement. I would rather face their eyes than bind myself to a life of suffocation. You would not have to face them alone." Her heart lurched. "Do not say that. I came because I knew what today would bring." His jaw tightened. "And because I could not bear the thought of your suffering being met with silence." Evelyn looked away, the rising sun glinting through the fog and blurring her vision. She had imagined escape as a solitary act, a clean severing from the expectations that strangled her. She had never accounted for the shadow beside the gate, the man who now complicated every step she wished to take. "Ride with me," Gabriel said quietly. "Not to bind you, not to claim you. Only to ensure you are safe until you decide where your path truly leads." His words threatened to unravel her carefully built resolve. He was offering protection without obligation, companionship without claim. But she sensed the unspoken currents beneath his restraint, the way his eyes lingered too long, the way his voice carried an ache she could not yet name. "Why do you involve yourself in this?" she asked, her voice barely steady. For the first time, he looked away as though the truth weighed heavily enough to bow his shoulders. "War teaches a man many things," he murmured. "It taught me what is worth saving." "And you think I am something to be saved?" "I think," he said, turning back to her with a gaze that felt like a confession held just behind his teeth, that losing you to a fate you despise would be a wound I could not endure. Evelyn felt her breath falter. The distance between them had become a fragile thread, and neither dared to cut it. A distant clatter shattered the moment. Multiple. Fast. Her pulse spiked. My father's men. Gabriel listened, expression turning razor-sharp. They are close. Instinct drove her. I cannot let them find me. And they will not, he replied, already turning his stallion. Follow me. Now. Without hesitation she spurred Rowan forward. Together they plunged into the shadowed line of trees beyond the gate, their horses kicking up frost and earth as they vanished beneath the thick canopy. Branches brushed her cloak and cold air stung her face, but fear pushed her onward. Gabriel guided them with the certainty of a man who had memorized every contour of the land. They weaved through narrow paths, skirted the frozen stream, and pressed deeper into the forest until the estate was nothing but a faint outline beyond the trees. Only then did he signal to slow. They stopped near a moss-covered wall, the remnants of an old shepherd's outpost. Evelyn dismounted, her legs trembling from exertion and fear. Gabriel remained alert, scanning the woods. They will look for hours, she whispered. They will, he agreed. But they will look in the wrong places. Evelyn leaned against Rowan, steadying her breath. The adrenaline began to ebb, leaving a different sensation in its wake, an awareness of the man beside her, of the choice she had made in following him. You said you would ride with me, she said. But where does that road lead? Gabriel stepped closer, his features carved in the cold light. Wherever you choose. But you must understand, whatever direction you take now will shape everything that follows. She searched his eyes, seeking the motive beneath his calm exterior. Was this duty? Pity? Something deeper? Before she could speak, he reached gently for her hand, not in possession but in anchoring. Evelyn, I will not make your decisions for you. But I will not abandon you to face them alone. The forest rustled, the wind shifting as though carrying distant voices. They were not safe. Not yet. But in that suspended moment, with the world narrowing to the warmth of his touch, she realized something unsettling. Her escape had begun in desperation. Now it teetered on the edge of something far more dangerous than scandal. Choice. And the possibility of a life she had never allowed herself to imagine. Fog lingered along the banks of the Harlan Bridge, curling around the stones like fingers reaching for secrets. Evelyn stood beside Gabriel, her breath visible in the cold air, her hands trembling not from frost but from the impossible weight of choice pressing upon her. Behind them, the distant clamor of search parties echoed, shouts carried over the water, the harsh scrape of boots against earth, the metallic glint of torches through the mist. Each sound was a reminder that the world they occupied was one of consequence, of reputation, of unyielding expectation. Yet here, in this liminal space between river and sky, the rules of society seemed suspended, as though only their hearts dictated the moment. Gabriel's gaze, unwavering, found hers. Evelyn, he said quietly, the timbre of his voice carrying across the fog, you have no reason to fear my counsel. But you must understand, whatever you decide now will shape your life irreversibly. She met his eyes, searching for certainty in a world that offered none. I have spent my life bound to the dictates of others, she murmured, and yet now, standing here, I feel as though every choice is my own, and that terrifies me more than any punishment my father could conceive. Gabriel reached out, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. The gesture was intimate, understated, but the electricity it summoned was undeniable. Fear is natural, he admitted. It is the companion of freedom. The difference is that you may choose whether it controls you or guides you. The river beneath them whispered against the stones, carrying a chill that seeped into their bones. Evelyn's gaze drifted toward the water, seeing the reflection of a dawn that had yet to break fully. It shimmered like hope, fragile yet insistent. She wondered if she could trust it. Could she trust him? Could she trust herself to embrace a life that no one had scripted for her? Why do you stay? She asked suddenly, turning to confront the question that had haunted her since the gate. Why risk your position, your honor, for me? I am but a girl fleeing duty. There is nothing in me to warrant such devotion. Gabriel's eyes darkened with a storm of emotion. You misunderstand. You are far more than that. I have watched you even from afar, and I have seen the courage you conceal beneath the weight of expectation. It is not simply affection that binds me to you, it is the recognition of what you deserve, of what no one else in this world seems able to see. Her throat tightened. Every word, measured and deliberate, chipped away at the wall she had spent years erecting. For the first time, she considered that her heart might not be hers alone to command. And the thought frightened her. A sudden shout pierced the fog, sharp and urgent. Footsteps followed, crunching against the frost-laden ground. Evelyn's pulse quickened. "They are closer," she whispered, panic threading through her voice. Gabriel moved instinctively, positioning himself slightly before her. "Stay behind me. We will not be taken today," he said, the authority in his tone leaving no room for doubt. The tension in his body mirrored her own, taut, ready to respond but controlled. He was a man forged in the crucible of war, yet here in the quiet danger of her escape she saw his vulnerability. They slipped along the bridge, moving through shadows and fog, the world narrowing to a corridor of mist, stone, and the uncertain rhythm of their own breathing. Each step was calculated, every motion deliberate. Evelyn realized that in his presence, fear became a shared burden rather than a solitary torment. When the searchers' voices finally faded, carried away by the bends of the river and the dense woodland beyond, Evelyn felt a fragile sigh of relief. She turned to Gabriel, her eyes searching for the reassurance that might allow her to embrace the unknown. "Evelyn," he said softly, stepping closer, "there is one thing I must speak even if the world forbids it." Her heart clenched. The weight of his words promised both peril and revelation. "Speak," she urged, though dread and anticipation twisted together inside her. "I have loved you," he confessed, the words deliberate, unyielding. "Since before the wars, since before I knew the world could demand so much of us. I have hidden it, I have tempered it with propriety and silence, but I cannot do so any longer. I will not see you forced into a life that suffocates your spirit, not when I could stand beside you and bear the risk myself." Evelyn's breath caught. The truth of his declaration struck deeper than the fear of discovery, deeper than the peril of scandal. Her heart, long constricted by obligation, surged with an emotion both terrifying and exhilarating. She wanted to step forward, to reach for him, to abandon the last vestiges of restraint. And yet she hesitated, aware that their world was not forgiving, that love, though radiant, carried its own perilous consequences. "Gabriel," she whispered, the name on her lips tasting of both fear and longing. "And if we are discovered? If my father's wrath, or worse, society's judgment, falls upon us?" He reached for her hand again, this time holding it firmly, grounding them both against the uncertainties swirling around them. "Then we face it together," he said. "For once, we will not allow fear or convention to dictate the terms of our lives." A cold breeze swept across the bridge, tugging at her cloak and tousling his dark hair. Evelyn looked down at their hands joined, then at the faint glow of the sun breaking through the mist, painting the river with light that promised both danger and deliverance. Her resolve solidified, tempered by the courage she had drawn from her own defiance and the quiet strength he offered. She knew the path ahead was fraught with uncertainty. She knew scandal, disapproval, and peril awaited them if they ventured further. Yet for the first time in her life, the world felt like a place in which she could choose her own fate. Evelyn lifted her gaze to Gabriel's, searching for the unspoken agreement between them. He nodded ever so slightly, and in that silent affirmation, the tension between duty and desire, between fear and freedom, seemed to hover in equilibrium. The fog swirled around them as the bridge stretched before their feet, a threshold to an unknown journey. The river whispered below, the stones beneath them cold and unyielding yet steady. Evelyn drew a deep, fortifying breath, feeling the stirrings of hope, of reckoning, of the possibility that her escape might lead not to exile, but to something more profound. A life shaped by her own choosing with the man who had waited for her at the gate by her side. And in the quiet stillness, as the sun continued its slow ascent, Evelyn realized that the greatest journey had only just begun.